All right, so as we begin here about 2 after the hour, I just wanted to welcome everybody to our fourth webinar here. This one's going to be all about assessments. We will recap a couple things from the previous ones, but if you prefer, you could go to the ACCSC website, jump on there, and they will have recordings and certificates and all that stuff from the previous three. So if you couldn't make it to the ones on Tuesday and the ones from last week, they'll still be up there for your leisure, and you could download those and watch those, anytime that you like to. Also, as you join us, if you check out on your control panel, we do have three handouts for you. We do have a sign-in sheet in case you need a sign-in sheet at your campus. It has a brief description of the webinar today and a little, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on that people can sign into. If you have a quick moment to print that out, you can print that out and use that. We also have the certificate available, so you can download the PDF. It's a non-individualized certificate. So some of you out there in the digital land, if you're joining us and everybody's sharing one computer, or you may have three people sharing a computer, or maybe some of you have it up on the overhead projector and you have a group of people watching this, we have non-individualized ones that you can of course, you could put your own name on there if you want to and edit it, or you can just write it in there and put it into the teacher files that way. We also have a copy of our presentation. I know sometimes there's a lot of neat facts or figures or information up on the screen. You might not have a chance to write it down, so I don't want you to fret and try to write things down and try to listen all at the same time. We provided our presentation to you in that handout section. And all this will be also available up on the ACCSC website. So, in the next day or two, you'll have all four sessions, all four handouts, all four certificates available up on the website to check out. So feel free to grab them right now. And if not, you could always grab them later on. So with that, we'll just kind of jump into all about assessments. Just to start us off with, I am on the right-hand side. My name's David. I'm going to be joined with Aaron. Aaron, say hello to everybody if you don't mind. Just make sure you're on the line here.
Yep. Hello, everybody.
Thank you, Aaron. Aaron and I will be tag teaming this, going through it. So if you have any questions, feel free to send any messages in the chat feature or the question feature on your control panel. So you can ask questions through there or put any comments through that questions feature. We are from a group called Siena. We basically are in the educational market, and we're committed to being, a foundational, a fundamental, and a strong part of delivering educational to everyone. And what we do is, we head up the licensing and compliance division. So we have consultants that work with you or to make sure everything's A-OK or is going to be A-OK. We have a team of great people that develop software and support. So they do some of the back end stuff that I don't even want to pretend I know about. But they do a lot of cool stuff to keep track of data, whether it's student data, faculty data, and all that fun stuff. We have a cool brand and marketing department that could help, deliver your message, whether it's going to be online, on social media, or in print. And Aaron and I are part of the Apple branch there, which is the curriculum licensing and development. We help develop curriculum and help people move offline to online or online to offline, and make sure the curriculum is sound and can meet the standards that are set forth by an organization or by internally by a group or committee. So that's us in general. I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of background, but I also want to give a background of what led us here. Basically, how did we get here, or how did we arrive at analyzing assessments? And what we want to do before we even start analyzing assessments is kind of taking a couple steps back and looking at appropriate learning objectives. So if you joined us before, we went through an hour session about learning objectives, but in general, what you want to make sure is you have learning objectives that are appropriate for the course, appropriate for the content in your course, and appropriate for your learners. And so we talked about looking at the end result first and looking at the vendor exams, the certifications and stuff, and making sure your objectives, can produce a student that can pass that vendor exam, can be a valuable person in the workforce in their chosen field. And so we hit a couple of those up. And then we moved on to mapping, where we taken a look at those objectives and we say, okay, how do we make sure our activities, our assignments can meet those objectives? How can students, go through a path, scaffold their learning, and go into, to say the assessments, which we'll talk about today, and be productive and be successful in those assessments. Aaron, anything else you want to add to kind of like the background of everything?
Yeah, so I think as David was touching on, the mapping of the course activities, that is basically, it is a long process after those learning objectives are developed. And this creation, when we're talking about the assessments here, this is a process that it can occur during some of the mapping. If you're making activities along as you go, it can occur after mapping when you've established, hey, I need this assessment here to cover this, or even if you already have specific assessments, assignments, and strategies in place, and you've completed all the course mapping. So there's not necessarily a set timeline, because ultimately in this course development, as we know as educators, we're always going back and looking at things and seeing, where can I improve, where can I fix, and just it's a constant revision process, evaluation, revision, rinse, repeat. And so we're always going through that. So this idea of creating the activities that we're going to discuss, creating these assessments, it's really based off of these first two activities, as David was talking about.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate it.
Okay, so we're going to just look at some common ideas with assessments. For me personally, the idea of looking at assessments, designing assessments, this is my favorite part of course creation, because really we want to, get you as educators thinking about assessments in a different way, thinking about it more outside the box, and, opening you to the idea that, assessments, they're not just written. They can come in many different forms, and even the written ones, which we're going to talk about a fair amount, even those you can diversify, you can make more engaging, and basically you can, improve them, so we're ensuring that those learning objectives are being met. So yeah, that first part, just assessments, they come in many different forms, and so we'll get into that a lot more. And then another idea that we want to kind of move beyond is that assessments, they don't actually have to be graded. What assessments are doing is they're telling us, they're evaluating in some way whether a learning objective has been met, or potentially multiple learning objectives. And this does not necessarily have to be associated with a grade. You could have just a pass-fail idea of even looking and saying, yep, this person, they definitely have met this, they understand it. It can be, on your end as a instructor, just from observations during class activities. It can happen during, student-teacher conferences where you discuss, what the student has learned, what they've, thought about, how they're now thinking about things. Especially, getting back to one of our previous discussions about objectives in one of our other webinars, if you're talking about some of the objectives that might be more related to an attitude shift or things like that, that might not be something that you can just have a standard grade, but instead you can have a situation where you do just have a conference with a student and see, okay, what is your mindset now? Or maybe a pre-survey, post-survey. Again, this idea that anything that is appropriate, that's what we're going to look to use. And then you can also simply have feedback assessments where you're just gathering feedback from students. Are they understanding things? Do they get the idea of what's being put forth? And if you do those right, those can even give you a clear idea of whether or not they've met a given objective. Then the next idea we get to is that, as we've been touching on, assessments, they're not just quizzes or exams. They can be much more than that, and they can just have a variety of different things. You can have activities serving as assessments, or even certain types of homework. If an exam's needed, you can think about what would make the most sense to test the material. So again, we often go towards that written assessment. We know that, we're comfortable with that, but taking a step back and thinking, what makes the most sense to actually evaluate whether or not the learner is meeting the objective? maybe for a certain objective, a practical would make more sense. Maybe in like an English or public speaking class, you might have a debate or an open forum instead of a traditional assessment. Essentially, we want to keep our mind open to all of these possibilities. And as I'll continue to say, we want to, work with whatever works best for our material, our students, and our class. And then the last idea we just want to move beyond is that assessments, they don't have to take place just after learning has occurred. You can have it before learning has occurred. You can have it during. A formative assessment taking place during, quick feedback to students so they're understanding throughout the process whether or not they are truly understanding the material, whether or not they're being able to apply it. You can have, the summative style of assessment after the learning has been completed, but it is not the sole type of assessment that we need to look at. So then we have a, discussion question here to start to just kind of branch out on this idea a little more. So in the question section, the chat section, just think about some alternative forms of assessment if you've used them in a class, if you've been part of a class, or even if you inherited a class that had those. And do you think they were effective? Because we just want to start getting these ideas of appropriateness, because really when we're creating assessments, where we're creating anything related to our course, we need things that are appropriate. That is the most important thing. What's appropriate for the learners, for the class, for the objectives. And so, yeah, as some people are saying, online classes, they can have discussion boards. Those can definitely help show whether or not objectives are being met. Some practical assessments, as someone's saying, with clinical-based classes, those work incredibly well. David, what about in your, teaching experience? Have you used any alternative assessments?
Yeah, put me on the spot here, Hired. I think
Always.
Yeah, I think what I'm seeing too from Rob and Cindy, Gail and Pam, and a lot of other people, I think it's easier to see or think of assessments kind of like what we talked about earlier, like as the end of unit or end of chapter test. But I find using and what was shared in the chat here is more formative assessment methods. And I think of that as like on the go, like during a lecture, or like if you're doing a discussion, like Robin was talking about, doing a discussion through a lesson to see if they're getting it. Because I like seeing the opportunity that gives me the way to pivot if I need to. So if I am talking about a certain topic, I could kind of pause, ask a good kind of assessment type of question that kind of see if they get it or not. And if they do get it, I could move on to the next topic. If they don't, then I could kind of clarify some of the misconceptions they have or some of those gaps that they may have. So, whether I use a question, just asking them, I purposely put it in a presentation slide, or I use student clickers. I kind of like using that on the go type of formative assessment, I guess.
Yeah, I like that. And one of the things that I'm seeing here that are mentioned, one person say, Q&As, another saying debates. And one of the important things that we need to realize with some of these alternative assessments, as David, I'm sure you utilize, is that we do need ways of, assessing them fairly, utilizing rubrics, utilizing clear defined criteria, as we've discussed in some of our previous presentations. So yeah, these are a lot of excellent ideas. Thank you for sharing. So now that we've discussed some of the alternative assessments, we're actually going to jump back into the written assessments. And the reason I like to do this, I like to get people thinking about those alternative assessments and then thinking, okay, oftentimes for various reasons, we're using written assessments. So how can we start to incorporate some of these better engagement ideas into written assessments? How can we, get rid of that, standard, mundane, written assessment, and how can we make it a little more engaging? And so the first thing with written assessments is really looking at the reason that we use them. And some of the primary reasons are, time, tradition, and ease. Time, written assessments really, we don't have to think of them a lot. We can just look and write some simple questions. We can, go and write some multiple choice questions, true false questions, and we're done. The student can go and do it. Then, tradition, we've been using it for so long, and sometimes tradition, we just go with it. As long as it's working, why fix something that's not broken? And what we're going to kind of discuss is that, you might be getting results, you might be seeing people pass with the same rates you always have, but taking some of these assessments and kind of transforming them, making them more engaging, using some alternate assessments, it can allow you to kind of capture the understanding of a larger group of people, a larger group of learners. And so we really want to try and do that. And then ease is one of the biggest ones that kind of fits into that time. We have the time restraints, we have, all these restrictions. Maybe we have deadlines or we simply just don't have enough time. So quickly putting together written assessments is often a fallback. So as I said, we're going to get into some of the different types of written assessments, what they're about, and again, how to make them more engaging. And one of these first ideas that written assessments, they do not, and often they should not, be rote memorization. And when we're referring to rote memorization, we're referring to simple definition and identifying the term. That is often not fully accomplishing anything that you have in like a learning objective, a learning goal. Instead, it's just kind of identifying whether or not a student can memorize something or whether or not they can, use knowledge to effectively take a test. So we want to move away from that idea and move away from, those memorization or simple answers. We don't want to spoon feed students. We want to make sure that we're actually assessing their knowledge of these objectives. So some assessments are formatted in a way that you can actually, if you're just good at test taking, you can kind of use process of elimination, understanding from previous questions to identify answers. And that's, again, it's not really testing what a student knows or whether or not they've met a learning objective. So we're going to start talking about some of the different types of questions that we can see. And some of the most standard ones that we'll discuss is, multiple choice, true, false, matching, fill in the blank, short answer, and essay. And I do see, some comments in the chat about how there is some terminology at times that does require memorization. And one of the big things that I'll say is that we do need that foundation of, being able to remember and recall information. Looking at, Bloom's taxonomy, we need to, remember, we need to understand. But when you look at your learning objectives, those objectives are often not memorize, these various terms. It's instead, be able to identify and, identify this piece of equipment or these pieces of equipment and their uses. And so we want to make it broader than simply just, rote memorization, taking it a step further and saying, okay, in some of those we do know, we need to memorize some of the ideas, we need to, understand some of the ideas, but let's get to that point where, they're not just going to be able to say, yes, I know that is, an arm bone, or I know that's a leg bone, but what does it actually mean? And so the first of these type of assessments we're really going to talk about is multiple choice, and this is one of the most common one that are used in all types of assessment, and it's also one of them that is one of the easiest to kind of make more engaging and make more fun, in my opinion, at least. When talking about assessments, fun is a relative term, but I'm going to probably end up using that word a lot, so bear with me. But multiple choice, it is one of the most common ones, and the question posed, as we've been talking about, it doesn't have to just be a definition, it doesn't have to be a simple question, but instead, as we see on this next slide, we can have a situation where it is actually a simple scenario, and it's related to your topic or learning objective. As some people had shared, in the IT field, using a simple scenario, that makes a lot more sense instead of saying, you know, what part of the computer holds the memory? You can instead say, hey, there's this scenario. There seems to be a problem related to memory utilization of the computer based off of this information. And what might be the most likely cause of that. So just kind of rewording things, taking it a different way, we can essentially try to make it more complex. And so if you have a situation, let's stick with the IT field, a computer technician, they're given a laptop that runs into the following error upon startup, and you can have an error code or, just describe the error. And you can ask the student, what is the first step the technician should take? So this goes beyond a question that might be, a simple, give a description of the step the technician would take. Instead, it's describing this real scenario, and it's creating a simulation of what might actually occur. So the student is thinking about it and saying, okay, I'm thinking about the scenario, I'm imagining I'm in that situation, what would I do? And when you're making responses, these answers, they're actually as important, if not more important, oftentimes, than the question itself. You should have, real options that might be available, or even common misconceptions. If someone normally looks to, the router for a specific issue, but it happens to be the modem, oftentimes, then, having both answers there to help ensure that the student is able to fully understand the concept and doesn't fall into those traps of those common misconceptions. So you want to definitely, when you're making answers, use your own words, make sure it is plausible. We don't want to get into that situation, as many of you might know, in like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, the really easy questions going on. Answer D was always this like silly answer that's basically a throwaway. We want to keep all the answers plausible. We want to make sure that, again, the student is fully understanding what is going on. And as someone's sharing here, you can have answers that might all be correct. If you're looking at troubleshooting steps, which is the first step? So again, they might all be real troubleshooting steps to take, but identifying what is the first. It's taking a simple question of identification and putting some processing into play, putting some critical thinking into play, and ensuring that a student is really understanding what is being asked. And then taking these multiple choices a step further, I really like a little variation on this simple scenario, which is just creating a complex scenario. And this complex scenario, it might be a few paragraphs long, a page long, and you're outlining a situation that could occur. You can have, the entire background to it. Basically, you're writing a little narrative, a little case study scenario. And off of that, you can have a variety of different questions related to, what do you do in this situation? Or how do you think about some of the things given this information presented? You can even, turn a scenario into an essay-based question, or as we're talking about, various multiple choice questions that build off that basically build off this information and maybe go from, even some of the idea that someone was talking about earlier with medical terminology, have simple identifying, which medical devices need to be used, and then start building off of that like simpler question that is identified in that scenario and making them a little more complex to, okay, identify these. Now, what are the uses? And then, what is the step to take now, given that scenario, given the object and given the uses? And as someone's saying, diagramming, labeling, those are, really good ones because, and they probably go a little bit past multiple choice, and we'll talk about them a little, but they're having ideas of basically creating that scenario in essence. If you're doing human anatomy, you have a diagram of the body and are putting things in. That's taking things a step further to, go beyond just simply the text, the way some text can describe something. So the next set of things we're going to talk about is, and I'm going to group them all into one category, the true false, fill in the blank, and matching. Now, true false, one of the first things I'll say about it is that at times when we're building assessments, we're actually trying to model them after, as David talked about earlier, we're trying to model them after various certification exams or licensing exams. And if those do have true and false, you should have some of those in your assessments. You know, at times we do have to try and model it off that. And so we need to make sure ultimately that the students are able to pass that. But I think when given the choice, true and false, I never use. And the reason being is that it's essentially too easy to guess. If you have a starting point of a student can get, 50% without studying, then you just don't have a lot of variance to know, well, is the student actually understand the material? If you have a 20 question true false exam, a student gets a 70, they get 14 out of them right. Are you positive that the student didn't happen to, just get a few extra right above the average of 10? You don't necessarily know, but still, the student passes. So true false, it's always really hard to identify whether a student really understands the material or not. And often I feel that they become a little convoluted. They become either, too tricky or too easy. Too easy in the sense sometimes it's obvious whether or not it's true false, or too tricky in the sense that you try to make it more complicated, and then depending on how it's read, depending on how it's interpreted, you can actually see different sides to it. So when I've had courses with true and false questions that I've worked with institutions on or instructors on, they've shown me some of the rationale that students have shared of why they might think their answer is right. And oftentimes you can see the smarter students, they can make a really good argument for it. So, when given the option, I tend to stray away from true and false just because, is it really assessing what we're looking for? And oftentimes if we look at that, it really isn't. So then fill in the blanks, it's to me kind of similar to true and false. If you are doing something like using a diagram, as Cindy suggested, you can make fill in the blank work pretty well. Have it, attached to diagram numbers and descriptions. If you're using terms that are easily confused, you have a couple of terms. I know, most people can remember back to early English having fill in the blanks that had the 3 types of theirs, there, and there. And, trying to put that in a sentence and make it work. Some things like that, it really is applicable because the student is going beyond, just inserting an answer into a definition, and they're actually having to, you're testing them on whether or not they understand the true usage. And so those are really good points to use some of those fill in the blanks. But often it just ends up being, simple definition, plugging in of answers. And again, when we're doing that, we're testing memorization as opposed to actual understanding. And ultimately our goal is to make sure, yes, we want the students to remember, yes, we want them to understand, but when we're looking at these assessments that test these objectives, we're often looking, can they apply the material learned? Can they take it a step further, and will they be able to actually work in the field? And so when we're considering using fill in the blank, that's one of the big things to consider. And then matching, I actually really like in some situations. Often I do feel that you can fall into that trap of fill in the blank and true false, where if you're just matching to definitions, I've gone over that. I think it's too simple. It's not necessarily testing. And you also get into the situation that we talked about earlier, is that if you know how to test well, at a point you get to that process of elimination where you basically have a few freebie answers. So what I really like to do is use maybe an order of operations scenario. You have various steps to troubleshoot a computer, and you have to put them in the right order, match them to the right order. What's the first step? What's the second step and third step? And what this does is, again, getting back to that multiple choice idea of a similar IT situation, you're not just identifying which of these are troubleshooting methods, but instead you're saying, okay, we know these all are. If you were a technician in the field, put yourself in those shoes, what is the order that you would have to go through? And how would you order this? And so that's a really good, story of that. And I actually previously worked with a career college and someone working for a refrigeration school. And he was looking to kind of make his assessments more engaging to truly test this idea. And that was what uh, he ended up liking and going with, is this idea of, putting the steps in order, putting a process in order, because for a lot of, these hard skills, you need to know the steps, that order, and that process. So then you can even, so going a step further, we can talk about, short answer and essay questions. And one of the reasons that many instructors, we tend to stray away from this is because honestly, it puts a significant burden in terms of grading. And it does put into question some objectivity at times, because you need to ensure that, as we were talking about a little earlier, the rubrics are sound. There's clear criteria for both the students and the instructors. Everyone knows what to be looking for. And so I like really, avoiding the longer complex sentences. Instead, setting up short answers for students. You want to see if they're understanding a question, if they're understanding an idea, but have them be concise. I know in our last session, someone talked about having, some assessments or some assignments, have them do it Twitter style in, 140 characters or less. See if they can truly, give you a good answer, get you to understand that they know what they're talking about in a concise manner. Because often if you have open-ended essay questions, for anyone that's graded this, we know one student, they might write 2 paragraphs and hit it straight on the nose. Another student might write 10 pages, and you can see at times, yeah, they're kind of getting it, but they're basically throwing a lot of things at the wall, seeing what sticks and seeing if they happen to boost their grade because they're not quite sure on the answer. So that's kind of some of the traps that we have with these, short answers and essays. So, setting clearly defined criteria, allowing the student to understand that and being able to work within those restrictions and limitations, that's really what we want to set ourselves up for and, work for some of the best success. So I've been talking a lot about these, so I want to, get a discussion question going. And in the chat, let's share some advantages and disadvantages of some of these written assessments. And then we're going to be delving into these alternative assessments. But just because we're going to be talking about that, and just because they can potentially be more engaging, they can be different, it doesn't mean we need to throw away written assessments. We need to definitely use them where appropriate. As someone said, considering Bloom's taxonomy, sometimes written assessments, they do hit the lower levels of Bloom. And that remembering, understanding, and even the early applying, as we're talking about, written assessments at times, they can definitely be really good for that. So David, from your work, what do you think? Some advantages, disadvantages from some of the written assessments you've seen?
Um, let's
Any
see.
student fallbacks issues?
Yeah, I think some of the advantages, I have two because I've taught on ground and online, and in both scenarios, I think the advantages is what we talked about, and what Nancy and some other people are talking about in the chat are, sometimes you have to use multiple choice questions, these written, more simplistic type of assessments, because that's what is going to be on the vendor exam. So I always like looking at the vendor exam, or if you've taken it and you're certified in it, then you know what you're looking for. Maybe your course objectives will lend towards more of the rote memorization because 35% of the exam is based on medical terms. So that will dictate. Okay, I probably should use multiple choice if it uses true false or fill in the blank. Look at that stuff. On the opposite end, sometimes I don't know if anybody has taken the Microsoft Office specialist exam, but a lot of that's performance based. So in those type of courses, I try to avoid the multiple choice type questions and do more, doing type things. And then some of the written assessments are helpful online for me because we like to do these quick hitters because online, basically it's always open note, open book for the most part, unless you have like a proctor or you have some type of software that acts like a proctor, and we don't. Um, and so what we like to do is have these quick hitters where, yeah, I want to make sure they get it, but they're worth less points. But it's just a nice recap, and we time them so they don't, can't take forever to look up the answers. But those are nice for those quick, like you talked about earlier, and those quick, simple assessments because I can put in those topics, and if I write them correctly and bring up correct, types of answers, it really is effective in that manner as well.
Hmm. Yeah, and as some people are saying, you do want to get, and as you were saying, you want to get people familiar with the exam type, and often, certification exams, they are written. And again, we don't want to completely get rid of them. We do want to utilize that for, the advantage of what it is that, increasing student familiarity, getting them used to, maybe some of the ways questions are worded. I know some of the IT exams will often, or IT certification exams will often have, some strange wordings to some of the questions. As talked about earlier, choose the best answer. A lot of these might be good, but you need to choose the best answer. So we definitely want to, get students used to that. But one of the things that I have found, to just toss as an idea to some of you that, are saying, we have to use this, our exams are to this, our certifications, we need to get them used to that, is that, when I've taught students, when I've worked in, with various other instructors setting up curriculums, one of the things I found is that we can have some of those exams. We definitely want the familiarity, but once we go to some of the more complex assessments where they're, taking some of these ideas and putting them into application, evaluating them, critically analyzing, at that point, if they come back to, some of the more simple multiple choice, things that they'll see on a vendor exam, they know what they're talking about at that point. So on the one hand, we definitely want to make sure that we're exposing them to that. On the other, think if a student is getting past that point, they're getting to the point where they can apply these concepts, they're getting to the point where they can start to, evaluate and analyze these concepts, they're getting to the point where those questions that they're going to end up seeing, those are going to be second nature for them. And so it will bring some success to that. So I definitely want to, you know, have people start to consider that. Just think about some of the ways, especially us as we're teaching the students, the reason that we're able to do it so effectively, it's not because we've memorized more than them, it's not because we've read more than them, but we understand how to apply these concepts. And that makes the teaching of the simple concepts really easy because we know where it builds up to. So I want to start talking about some of these alternative assessments and looking back into some of the different ways that we can kind of create some of these assessments that do ensure some of those lower level concepts, the terms are remembered, and everything like that, that we're definitely very concerned about to ensure that students are going to be successful in these exams. But let's talk about some other ways that we can also go beyond that to ensure the learning. And I'm going to largely refer to these alternative assessments as non-written assessments. And that doesn't mean that we actually can't use writing, but non-written just in the term of we're moving away from this traditional, quote unquote, pencil and paper style test. And so we can go and think about, just looking at this learning objective, what is the best way to test an understanding of a learning objective? So if you have a learning objective of, install a small engine, would, a multiple choice exam, that's not going to necessarily do it. But as some people have said, a practical exam, would definitely, yeah, practical, hands-on, as someone shared, you need to do that to show that, to demonstrate that you have met that objective. So we do need to look at these objectives and make sure that we're testing them. And then we have some scenarios that we're going to go into to start getting into this idea more because sharing these ideas, it really helps with that. So David, do you want to start, sharing some of these fun scenarios?
Sure, that sounds great. So the first one we have, and we're going to hit a couple different areas, but feel free to, maybe use some types of formative assessments, summative assessments, alternative assessments, whatever it might be. Maybe that might relate over into this field. So the first one is this business field. And so we're looking at, say, the course objectives, and it says by the end of this course, learners will be able to analyze and define strategies that make customers feel valued, employ strategies for establishing and maintaining positive customer relations, and examine the importance of sales knowledge regarding customers and products. So I'll put Aaron on the spot here in a little bit, but in the
Mhm.
questions area, feel free to share some maybe alternative assessments for one or more of these kind of course objectives, and maybe moving away from the simple multiple choice type questions. What can we do to maybe have these type of assessments near the end of the course? I know someone in the chat was talking about scaffolding. At the beginning, novice users might need that ABC type of multiple choice answers because they're beginning to learn the materials. But by the end of the course, which is key here, they should be able to maybe apply it. They have all this knowledge already. Like Aaron mentioned, what are some alternative methods that we can assess them upon? And Aaron, I'll start you off while I take a look in the chat. Or you taking a look in the chat? I think we have a lot of good examples trickling already, but I like to put you on the spot since you put me on the spot.
Oh yeah,
All
always.
right.
Yeah, and yeah, I have, a few ideas I think with this, and yeah, some people I see, stating the same thing as well, having, role-playing scenarios with
Oh yeah.
a, business person and a customer, doing something like that. Actually, yeah, creating that scenario, that's a great one. And as someone said, you can have them play different roles, switching the roles in the scenario to ensure they're understanding all the perspective, all the concepts. I really like the idea of like doing a video presentation. So again, let's let, you know, students be creative. Let's let them, do a video presentation or an in-class presentation. And for this specific one, of good and bad practices with respect to customer interactions, they can, share a good one, share a bad one, because in this situation, to know the positives, making customers feel valued, positive customer relations, and the importance of it, you also need to know the negatives as well. So I think that's really important. Or the other I like, going a little on the creative end is making, let's say, like a workflow diagram and outlining the steps to take based on certain customer responses, certain situations. You have a situation, is the customer happy to start? Yes or no? And that determines the next path you go on. And at every point, you have another question helping to determine the strategy that you employ. What other ones are you seeing, David, from people?
I see a lot of good ones. I have, like I talked about, simulations. We have, mock anything, and doing more project-based stuff, like applying the real world part of the job. Like if they're going into marketing, they have to make a marketing campaign, for example. Something that employs these type of objectives, but it's more of a robust, and also a real world type of assessment they can do because they could apply what they're doing in the classroom, work it out in the classroom, but it's something they're actually going to do once they, get or earn that job.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay. You want to move on to the next
Yeah, a
scenario?
lot of good ones here. So let's just move it on, just in case someone couldn't, came up with a good answer, or maybe business was out of their realm. But we'll move on to maybe the IT field. Most of us may be familiar with computers in general, so this might help us out. And this is one that says by the end of this course, learners will be able to create and modify files and folders in an operating system, create, prepare, and manage word processing documents, design and develop spreadsheets and workbook documents, produce and modify databases, construct and manage presentations. So right now, when I'm looking at this, I see kind of like a standard Microsoft Office type course, because I see, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and maybe Access. But again, it's general enough that maybe it's beneficial to teach these students the Mac components to it, or alternative software in than Microsoft Suite. But that's kind of the idea I'm looking at, the kind of like Word, and how can they, create and modify files, kind of create documents, create spreadsheets, create databases, and maybe, do a presentation. So I'm looking in the chat here. As I'm looking on it, this one kind of lends well to one that I've done, and I see some people doing it, showing YouTube to, show different processes to begin that. I think that's a good one, and maybe they can replicate that one. I like this one because it is one that lends itself to a nice kind of comprehensive intertwining final project that you could assess them upon. You know, Microsoft certification has recently changed this, where they used to assess you when you were going into for the vendor exam, and they would give you like 20 to 30 like quick type of things to do. Yeah, and this is real generic and not even right on, but say, bold this, right align this, make two columns. And it was kind of disjointed. And what they've done is they changed it to say, you need to create this type of document. And they kind of give you a list of things that, what it should look like. And you need to do all those things. So it kind of intertwines it more. So I think making some type of end of project that they have to submit a Word document that has an Excel spreadsheet, embedded into it, and maybe they do it during a presentation to the class, something like that. Aaron, you seeing it in
Yeah,
the chat?
yeah, I really like the idea that someone had of actually designing a business,
Oh,
including,
yeah.
cards, letterhead, payroll, etc. So basically, it's going even over the scope of all of these objectives
Mhm.
and saying, okay, we have these objectives that amount to something. What ultimately is the student going to be doing out in the real world?
Mhm.
And so, going and putting that situation where, okay, they're in, basic IT field at this business, let's have them set all this stuff up.
Mhm.
One thing that I like, more directly is, let's give the student an answer. Let's give them a data sheet that is already done, and just don't give them any more information than that, and have them actually work the steps backwards to figure out what were those initial inputs of the data. What data set did you start with?
Mhm.
For this, I really like that idea because, if someone can, we're learning or teaching them how to work the steps in order, but if they can work it backwards, you can definitely, see that they know the entire process, they understand that.
Yeah, that's perfect, and that's one of those things too that it's just nice to look at that vendor exam that might help you do that, and take a look at what you want to do in your course because of the objectives, because it might lend to that more, and some people have said that more critical thinking that is demonstrated in these type of assessments.
Mhm.
Perfect. All right, so let me
I
go.
think, yeah, we have some nice ideas coming in.
Yeah, I got some nice ones.
Uh,
Let's do one more, and if you want to do one more, I'll do one in the healthcare industry, if
yeah,
that's okay.
this is my favorite. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, there's a lot of good ideas. What this one is learning objectives. So think you're in the healthcare field, or you're helping a teammate or a fellow faculty member, and by the end of this course, learners will be able to locate the major organs of the body, find the major arteries on a person, identify proper procedure for a patient donating blood, follow proper procedures in the event of a blood donor responding negatively post donation, and understanding the steps that occur with blood donations after they leave a center. So this one focuses on mostly on donating blood. So that could be a course that's focusing on that type of aspect. And then some of the kind of beginner type of, I think, objectives are finding the major organs and finding major arteries and stuff. So um, I think a lot of our answers will lend to this one as well. And I see some are coming in. What do you have, Aaron, for this one?
This is actually, yeah, this is one of my favorites from a lot of work I've done in the healthcare industry. And oh, I like that one someone shared. Use Play-Doh to build the organs and
Hmm.
help identify the look of that. I've never
Cool.
heard that before, but I really like that. Um, I like the idea of setting up a simulation in a classroom of a blood center, have people taking roles. Basically, you walk into the classroom, and as the instructor, you've already kind of set up a general idea. Maybe you just use place cards to say, here's um, the beds, here's the intake room, and things like that. And then as students come in, you just hand them a card, kind of like a murder mystery, you know, type of thing, where you just get a card and you have to, take over that persona. And so you have people start working, in this blood center, some as patients, some as, doctors, some as nurses, some as, receptionists, and then you can pose certain situations. Maybe all of a sudden, one of the patients faints. What are they supposed to do? And so you can basically take that in a lot of different directions. And yeah, it looks like some people have done some things similar to this, a mock clinic. And yeah, anytime you're able to put a person in the actual situation, it's really good. If anybody's ever been at a teaching hospital, either as a, working there or even as a patient, some of the, early on nurses and doctors, they haven't always gotten all the experience they need, and you can tell when someone hasn't. But creating these mock scenarios, it at least tries its best to simulate what they're ready for. And so, what are some of the things that you're seeing come in, David?
A lot of stuff. A lot of the mock stuff is very good. I did want to bring up one thing which I think is important with these type of alternative assessments is, some things are not as easy to grade. So, you have a ABC type test. You could grade it yourself with an answer key, use a Scantron machine, or maybe there's software that does it for you. How do you grade these type of things? Especially when things are more subjective in nature, I guess. And so I was chatting with somebody, and I'm chatting with somebody else here too. Is you know when possible, try to bring in a rubric for these type of assessments, so it is fair. Because I want to be fair to all my students, and people might do things a little bit differently because it's a live environment or a scenario based or a mock environment. And that rubric will, hold me to the standards that I should be looking at, but it's also something that you can or cannot share with the students too, so they know what they need to be, successful in the different parts.
Yeah, and I did see someone sharing that. I believe it was something to do with like media. You have speaking and microphones getting in front of a camera,
Mhm.
and for any of these type of scenarios and stuff, what we think about is think about a professional in the field. What are we looking for? What are the things that we're looking for? And base your rubric off of that. Because I've definitely had people go and say, well, this is a practical. We can't make a rubric. Well, you can. You as the instructor, when you're grading it, what are you looking for? What tells you that they're successful? And just breaking it down and putting that into a rubric, it is incredibly helpful for that. And one of the things I also want to add is that, some people are talking about how, this really works for the healthcare industry, some of these simulations like this, but I really think you could do this in almost any industry. The IT industry have a customer service center, and people bringing in broken devices with problems and have some of those interactions, or a mock even customer support call center with some people calling in and some not. In the business, as we were talking about, having people um, simulate maybe a real business, a real center, or doing things like that. And then I do want to share my absolute favorite type of assessment, which, you know, it takes some time for students to get used to as well as instructors to get used to, because this is one of them where you need to have a clearly defined rubric and say, well, here's how you can demonstrate you have learned an objective. But I like going and saying, okay, we've taken, 2 months learning this objective. Now you have a chance to do any sort of project, any sort of assignment. Show me that you have mastered that objective. And what that really does is it puts students in control. It puts them in control to show you, yes, I understand this objective, and I'm going to show you in the way that I learn best, in the way I understand, and in the way I can express myself. Because as we often learn, and as we've talked about, students may learn differently. Some might want to, have an oral discussion with you and just convince you they know what they're talking about. Others, are better expressed through a written fashion where they can go in, write and explain to you. They understand it. Whereas others, maybe they're more theater based. They want to, put on a play with some other, students. And, giving students this opportunity to be creative, to show different ways that they are able to, master these objectives and they're able to express it to you, that's really important because when we are just having, a pencil and paper exam, oftentimes there are going to be students that struggle that may actually understand the material. I think most of us as instructors have seen, students that are incredibly successful during class and, they're the first one to answer a question, first one to raise their hand, they do all the assignments excellently, and then they just have severe test anxiety. They come back, they test, and they fail every time. And doing some of these alternative assessments, one, if there is a certification exam, of course, we need to get them used to that. But doing some alternative assessments, it can ensure that, is the student actually getting the material and it's just a test taking that we need to work on with them, or is the material beyond them? Are they not understanding it? And so this gives us an opportunity to really take a different look at these same objectives and assessing them and understand, are these objectives met, which is our ultimate goal.
Yep. Awesome. All right, so as we come close to this hour here, I just want to put on one more discussion and think about some of the different non-written assessments we've discussed and we've shared in the question area here. What type of style or what type of alternative assessment would be you think easiest to implement the next time you do it, or what's one that's been easy to implement in your class? Maybe instead of doing a written part, what could you substitute maybe some type of other thing for if it lends itself to it?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, and as some people start to send in some of the discussions, David, if you're okay with this, I think we can, help to wrap up a little as things come on and
sure.
do some of the little administrative stuff. Do you want to share some of that?
Yeah. So as we wrap up here, I just want to let everybody know that if you weren't here at the very beginning, we do have the handouts in the we have a handout section that has the certificate there. It has a the copy of our presentation as well in a PDF format, so you could all view it easily and print it out if you need to. We also have a sign-in sheet in case you need one at your campus. All this stuff is in the handout section, but it's also going to be available on the ACCSC website. Give them a day or two because we need to send them a copy of the presentation here and send them the materials as well. But they put it up pretty fast. I think it usually goes up within a day. On top of that, they have all the previous ones too. So you could find all four up there within the next day or two. And get your certificate, get the copy of the presentation, watch the recording if you need to. If you want to share this with your fellow faculty members or staff members, you can do that as well. And then I do like to share this slide here at the very end, and just to have our emails available to you guys since we're wrapping up here. I know sometimes you have a question, maybe not right now, but it pops in later on the day. It pops in a month from now, a week from now, or whatever it might be. Please feel free to email us, aaron.appleby@ciena.com, david.grimes, that's me, at ciena.com. We're more than happy to discuss things further that we've maybe started in the question or chat area. If you have any questions, we will definitely help you out. If you have an idea or something, or you're just conflicted on something, reach us out. I always like to tell people I like to be your free teacher assistant for a little bit. So, use and abuse us in that manner if you like to. I always say we're always in this together. I might not be at your campus, but I am a fellow educator. Aaron is a fellow educator. And we want what is best for our students, to be successful, not only in the classroom, but out in the field. And so that's why we're more than happy to share some things that we've gone through, some things that people are saying in the chat, because I think we're all one giant team in the career college field here. So with that said, I'll pass it back to Aaron here in a moment, but I do want to share one that kind of coincides with that alternative assessment and trying to find ways to change it. Is that I taught at one time a effective communications class on ground and online. And on ground's pretty simple because we do different types of speeches, and how we assess them was to have them go up and talk for the class, and we had a rubric, and was pretty simple that way. Teaching it online was a little bit more difficult. But we did have to rely more on multiple choice type questions, that written assessment. But for some speeches that didn't require it to be too long, I set up a Google Voice account, which is like a free phone number that Google gives you. And they had to give a speech in the 3 minutes of the answering machine service that happened. So they would call my number in, it would beep, and would give them 3 minutes to leave a message. So they had to give their speech to me in a message, and they had a rubric to the same rubric, but it was a different way to kind of, bring that on ground atmosphere where they actually have to talk to somebody, like what I think Wendell was saying and stuff on his class. It's, part of it is being a good, speaker, person in front of the microphone, a person in front of a group of people. And so, it's one way to answer a bunch of questions online to, identify good parts of a speech, but it's another thing to actually give a good speech. So we had to be a little creative in that way. We were limited on the time and stuff, but it was a nice step, I think, to kind of hear my students and assess them on their verbal delivery. Aaron, do you have anything in the chat or anything that you want to share?
Yeah, first I want to say is that we're definitely gonna, stay on as long as we
Mm-hmm.
can before we get kicked out, so we can, go and answer any final questions that everyone has. And, the recordings of this, along with all those materials, will be on the ACCSC webinars page, so you will be able to see that. Um, yeah, so some of the things I'm seeing come in, some ideas of even implementing like Q&A debates, and having things like that. And that, I think, it's a really nice and easy one, just to start to kind of put in place of a lecture or some sort of discussion. And so I think that's a nice one. And I think there's a question more directed towards your Google Voice,
Okay.
David. Were the students able to hear their own recording after the speech to self-assess? That's a good question.
You can. Google Voice allows you to save the messages. So you could save those messages, and we have a student management system or an LMS that allows us to share those easily as an MP4. They weren't too long since we were 3 minutes. Because everybody says I hate hearing myself, but it is the best way to improve upon yourself. That's an excellent idea. But yeah, Google Voice allows you to save it as a MP3 format, and then you could share them that way as well. So it's an excellent kind of next step to think about too. That's excellent.
Yeah, perfect. And yeah, if there are any other questions, send them along. And one of the last things I do want to mention
Mm-hmm.
with this idea and this discussion question is that, think about some of these, that are pretty easy to implement, pretty easy to try, and, just give it a try. Try to do that instead of one of your traditional assessments. Do it instead of, maybe a lecture. Just make it an activity, an assignment instead. Just trying to diversify the learning to really connect to all the different learners that you may have. That's our overall goal, and the more, non-traditional, I guess, for lack of a better term, types of activities, assessment, and things like that that we have, the better we are able to connect with all these different learning types, all these different learning styles.
Yeah. So as with that, Aaron, I just want to officially, say thank you very much for joining us today, or even the last couple days or last 2 weeks and stuff. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day and sharing your ideas and thoughts and listening to some of ours. And I said, hopefully, we made your day a little bit better, maybe make your classroom a little bit better. But if you do want to stick on, I say usually we could stick on to about 15, 20 after we've been pushing the limit here. So if you have somewhere to go, I realize we're at the top of the hour here, a little bit past it. So thank you so much for those people. And hopefully we can get in touch with you sometime later. And hopefully you have great success in your classrooms. And for anybody else that wants to stick on, we'll stay on as long as we get questions. So feel free to stay on if you do have some questions that you want to ask us here. Other than that, thank you very much.
Okay, and the first one to answer that I see here,
Okay.
pretty simple, accsc.org, not .com, and you
Yeah.
will find the ACCSC website. And
Hmm.
so from there, you can get to their page on webinars. And I believe right now it has all 4 of our webinars that we've had over the past 2 weeks, as well has the presentations for those, the sign-in sheet certificates, and everything like that. Okay, well, David, are you seeing any other questions here? I'm seeing it
I
being pretty
think
quiet right now.
I think that's a lot of them.
So,
I just want to say thank you to everybody. I'm trying to say thank you to everybody who's
yeah.
pushing this out here. I appreciate everybody who's been, from my hometown in the Ohio area. Aaron's based out of Chicago, so I know there's some fans out there as well. And everybody else, thank you so much. I was telling everybody, Aaron and I have definitely been looking forward to the last 2 weeks for Tuesday and Thursday. I always think it's so nice to touch base with other educators out there. That's why I like going to like a conference or going to meetings and stuff. There's just so many good ideas out there, and I appreciate you sharing some stuff. What we'll do is we'll work with our team to try to put together something where we can maybe share something from all four different presentations. So you have a nice little handy dandy guide as well as the presentations and stuff. And if anything great came along in the chat that we could kind of formulate into a nice response on a PDF or something, we'll make sure to share that. So kind of keep an eye out on the ACCSC website, and we might try to get in touch with a lot of you who are interested in maybe receiving additional materials and stuff. Again, feel free to email us. Let me push back that slide in case you are joining us. If you are interested in other ideas or you have other ideas to share, feel free to contact us personally at those emails. You could also find our company on Twitter and Instagram and all that fun stuff if you want to kind of spy on us and see what we look like in different pictures and stuff. Feel free to jump on in there. Other than that, I don't have
Yeah,
anything else.
I am seeing a question come through. For anyone that's interested, because Maria posed this,
Oh, good idea.
we do, presentations like this, webinars and things like that. We do customized presentations for, other groups. And, if you are interested, feel free to send us an email. We can discuss, all the fun business type stuff. But we definitely, we enjoy putting on webinars, doing things like that, and definitely customizing to people's needs. So
Yep.
that's definitely something we're able to provide.
Yeah.
If you're interested in, yeah, for anything like that, any, curriculum, review, development, things like that that you might have, you can also send to us, and we'd be happy to, let anyone know if we are able to be of help or, provide you in the right direction.
Yeah, but Maria brings up a good point too. That for career services, we focus on the train part, I guess, in this series a lot. But it is important to hit on. I think the opposite ends too is you recruit people, you train your students, and then you want to place them, which I think Maria is talking about more of the career services. We do work in all those areas, so even informally, Maria, if you want to reach out to us, we would be more than happy to discuss something. And, it's something that we could talk with ACCSC about too and see what we can do and maybe in the future. So thanks for bringing that up. We're always happy to hear, ideas for things that you guys are interested in because sometimes we don't know until someone says something. So I appreciate you, giving some interest. So we will definitely look into that, Maria. Thank you. So other than that, I think that might be it, Aaron. So I appreciate again everybody's time and thank you, Aaron. And we had Jen Menon down the chat too. She was our silent third person here. So I want to thank Jen too for all the help and thanks to Chris and everybody at ACCSC for these webinar presentations. These have been a lot of fun. Hopefully we can do some more in the future, and hopefully you guys will have a great Thursday and Friday to end the week here. Other than that, thank you very much.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.